Jason Rantz, Seattle radio talk show host, joins me now with reaction to all of this. Jason, thank you for coming on. You know, the Southern Poverty Law Enforcement Center, the Law Center, the organization that supposedly tracks extremism here in America, has dismissed the idea that Antifa was a threat to anyone. They once said in an article that the threat of lethal violence pales in comparison to that posed by far-right extremists. So those are their exact words. Tell me what group on the right they are talking about that are violently attacking law enforcement.
They don't actually exist. And what we often hear from this organization and others, including some folks in the media, is that there's this big white supremacy threat. And certainly white supremacy exists. But they don't actually label some of these groups. Every once in a while you'll hear a name, but they just say white supremacy threat. We have actual organizers who become terrorists once they become Antifa activists because they use their political ideology to inflict violence upon people. Their intent is to scare people into taking their political positions. And in this case, their intent is to help abolish police. They want to get rid of this particular facility. This is very clear example of domestic terrorism, and yet it's not labeled as that. You've got the SPLC coming out basically doing PR for this organization. They like the ideology behind the violence, and so they're unwilling to call it out. And then, of course, you've got the lawyers on the ground, and I've seen this in a lot of my coverage of Antifa. Mm-hmm. They are there to help the terrorists get away with their violent actions.
Absolutely.
That's it. No, they're not there to enforce the law.
A 28-year-old lawyer with the group was, in fact, among those arrested, which goes to show you how bold and brazen these people really are. The New York Post's editorial board is calling for action when it comes to these extreme activists. Their headline reads this: Antifa should be labeled what it is, a hate group. Former Attorney General Bill Barr said he did his best to warn the new administration.
Something has to be done. My very first day in office, I met with, or the first few days in office, I met with Chris Wray and urged him to get the FBI on top of the Antifa problem. And I thought we were making some progress, but I'm very disappointed that this kind of thing can happen without the government being aware of it.
Shouldn't the White House be disappointed? Well, let's ask White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, because she said this.
Dozens of people were arrested protesting the so-called cop city. Is the president aware of this?
Say that again. What was the protest?
There have been 23 that have been charged with domestic terrorism.
No, I have not heard any discussions about this protest over the weekend.
I mean, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, pretends as if Antifa doesn't exist. There you've got the White House press secretary being absolutely clueless about the Antifa movement. Then if it's not being addressed by the White House, the president and the administration, then clearly it's being ignored. And that's why this behavior is allowed to continue.
Exactly. It is willfully being ignored. And we've seen time and time again, politicians refuse to acknowledge that Antifa exists. They do not even use the language. Mm-hmm. They tell us that it was an invention of the far right and Fox News when we've got video. What else do you call the people who are doing these kinds of domestic acts of terrorism? They are members of a group. It's loosely organized. There's no doubt. There's not like a membership group. There's not a president of Antifa. But these are folks who self-organize regionally. They connect via social media and different apps that allow them to get away with this kind of communication without getting caught. And then they ultimately decide what their next target's going to be. We've seen a lot of it in the Pacific Northwest. We saw a lot of those folks travel into Minneapolis to engage in their terrorism. And now we're seeing it here in Atlanta. Again, to the point that it's not a lot of folks who actually live in Georgia. It's because Antifa as an organization, the people who identify with it, are all throughout the country. A lot of it is in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. And they do end up getting together and they travel, they raise money, not only just to bail people out of jail, but so that they can get to the location.
I want to get to another topic before I have to let you go. House Republicans promising to protect female athletes, and they are making good on that this week. Lawmakers are set to take up a bill. It's called the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. It only allows those born as girls to compete in women and girls school sports. Now, the issue issue really blew up over Leah Thomas, a UPenn swimmer who competed as a man for the first 3 years of her college career. She then transitioned and moved to the women's side, routinely crushing her biological female competition. Well, one of those competitors is Riley Gaines, a former University of Kentucky champion. She actually tied with Thomas at the collegiate championships last year. Gaines has been outspoken on the issue. Watch.
We have gotten to a point in society where we're denying basic truths. Man and woman is the sheer essence of humanity, and these people are trying to blur that line. They're pursuing this aggressive attempt to fully eradicate women as a whole, which is incredibly heartbreaking.
I mean, girls' sports is already competitive as it is. I have a daughter who's 13, but she's the size of a 10-year-old. She's already got it tough enough competing against other girls that are much bigger than her. So to imagine having a boy compete against her would seem incredibly unfair. I'm not even really sure why we're still debating the issue.
Yeah, I mean, look, generations of women fought for the rights to be able to compete on an even playing field, only to now have the so-called feminists on the left say, well, biological men should compete. It's patently unfair. You can be respectful and compassionate towards folks who are transgender while also acknowledging that them participating in women's sport is inherently unfair because, despite what progressives will tell you, there are differences between men and women.
Jason Rantz, thank you so much for talking to us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Julie.